We initially moved to Des Moines from the suburbs nearly 12 years ago. The suburban school system wasn't equipped to assist with our children's mental health issues. Our move to the Ingersoll Park neighborhood was not quite south of Grand, but it was pretty darn close. The neighborhood was one of the wealthiest in Des Moines, with venerable old houses, mature trees, and an air of prosperity and influence. The mayor lived on the street behind us. I'll admit that I saw our moving there as an indication of having made it. I'm embarrassed about this now, but I wanted to belong in that kind of neighborhood. It also offered to fulfill my lifelong dream of fixing up an old house. It soon became apparent why our stately old home was sold as is. Let's see. After pouring an embarrassing amount of money into the house, we realized we would never be able to do all the restoration needed. At about this same time, I became enamored with simplifying our lives, and first on the list was getting out from under our crushing mortgage. I kind of went on a simplicity kick and took my family along for the ride. I had this great idea. Let's move to a socioeconomically challenged part of the city, be urban pioneers, grow our own food, raise chickens. All we needed was the right house. We found our house in Cheatham Park, a small neighborhood south of University. Cheatham Park couldn't be more different from our Ingersoll neighborhood. While residents of Ingersoll Park are more than 95% white and highly educated, residents of Cheatham Park are more than 80% Black, Latino, and Asian, and 43% do not have a high school education. As of 2013, the median income of Ingersoll Park residents was more than $75,000 a year, compared to under $28,000 in Cheatham Park. Our new zip code holds the dubious distinction of having the most abandoned and condemned houses in the city. I had second thoughts almost immediately. I remember standing on the front porch, the peeling, crumbling front porch, with my husband that smotheringly hot August day of our move, and asking rather meekly, "Have we made a terrible mistake?" He didn't answer. Between the mess that was the house, we lived in a construction zone for months, bats in the attic and flitting through the house at night, and the general disrepair in the surrounding neighborhood, I was heartsick. 2 houses on our street sagged under the weight of abandonment. Several others stood behind boarded windows, and our own poor house suffered from decades of neglect. I was horrified to see a gang symbol spray painted on our neighbor's garage. Loud music strained our ears and our patience at night, the thunderous booming of rap on one side and the rollicking beat of mariachi assaulting us from the other, as everyone seemed to party in the middle of the street. Every morning there were beer cans and alcohol bottles strewn in the street and onto the grass. We met a couple of neighbors, but I felt so shy and conspicuous that I didn't go out much. I was uncomfortable and self-conscious. I had never felt so white. When we moved here, I would have said that I was colorblind. Although I knew racial discrimination existed, I, personally, wasn't prejudiced. If that was true, then why was I afraid to arrive home alone after dark? Why was it so hard to work up the nerve to talk to my neighbors? I saw through my fear and discomfort my own obvious yet subtle racism, and I was appalled. Waking to the flashing lights of police cars at night became commonplace. There was a shootout next door and a stabbing in front of our house. Just last year, we heard gunfire, loud, multiple reports. Like idiots, we all ran to the windows. The next day, we found a bullet lodged in our siding and learned that another bullet had penetrated our neighbor's house, landing miraculously on top of his daughter's foot. Another time, I saw a group of Black children running hard through the alley, 2 police officers on their heels. I couldn't help but wonder, in a white neighborhood, would kids automatically run from the police? Here, the rules were different. My focus became how to get out of the neighborhood. What in the world had we done? I kept myself miserable for years, yearning to leave instead of embracing where I was. With each new police incident, all I could think was, get me out of here. Gradually, I began to realize I had nothing to fear. No one was out to get me or mine. My neighbors just want the same things we all want: a safe place to live and raise their kids, a good job, a home. I began to see more similarities than differences. I started walking through the neighborhood. The group of young black men who hung around the park, I suspected they sold drugs. I'd say hi as I walked by and make a little small talk when appropriate. At those times, I understood in a very limited way what it felt like to stick out because of my skin color. Why did I automatically think they sold drugs? Would I have thought that of a group of young white men? I began to seek answers to the questions of race that surrounded me. I attended a book group here at First Unitarian discussing the new Jim Crow. At first, I was skeptical of the author's claims, but lawyers and administrators in Polk County government verified the book's main premise, that our current system of mass incarceration and the war on drugs not only disproportionately incarcerates blacks, it ultimately creates a new version of the Jim Crow South. I learned that felons, after serving their time, are denied the right to vote in Iowa and other states. Who did this affect most? People of color. I heard stories of racial profiling, driving while black and walking while black, from people living in my own city and even in my own neighborhood. I read The Warmth of Other Suns and discovered the true horrors of the Jim Crow laws in the South and the virtual slavery free black families lived under, the very real fear of violence, lynching, death. I learned about redlining and systematic and deliberate government efforts to segregate housing that lasted clear into the 1960s. Redlining and predatory lending still happen today. Last January, I attended an Iowa ACLU forum on voting rights. I asked panelist Wayne Ford, a former state legislator and longtime civil rights advocate, what I, a middle-aged white woman living in our socially disadvantaged and minority neighborhood, could do to make a difference. He asked how long we had lived there, nearly 8 years at the time. Well, he said, you haven't left. I thought about that long and hard. How was I making a difference simply by living here? Meanwhile, I read Dear White Christians. I learned the history of whiteness in the United States, and that as a white person, I must recognize my responsibility for institutional racism. White privilege makes everything in my life easier than if I were black. I never had to warn my white teenaged sons how to behave if pulled over by the police, nor worry that a misunderstanding with authorities might result in their deaths. Even though I didn't create the system, I benefit from it each and every day. To do nothing to promote change is to quietly offer approval. How had I never seen this before? My ancestors emigrated from Germany in the mid-1800s. My great-grandfather was able to amass enough land and wealth to leave a 200-acre farm to every one of his 14 children. All this while his black counterpart was just leaving slavery and enduring the hateful Jim Crow laws of the South or the insidious racism of the North. My great-grandfather worked hard, but there were economic opportunities, because he was white, that have trickled down through our family history, adding to our wealth and stability throughout the generations. The more I read, the more I learned real American history. Now we see the horror of police brutality targeting black men and women and realize this is nothing new. We now simply have technology to capture it. And yet some whites see the Black Lives Matter movement as an unfair attack on themselves or police. It is our guilt as white people that keeps us from seeing reality. At Mark Morrison Reed's workshop, he emphasized the importance of relationships. When your friend, classmate, neighbor, or family member is black, you can no longer deny the harms they suffer. It was as if he were speaking directly to me. It's not enough to just sit on the sidelines and quietly simmer with outrage. When my husband and I finally invested ourselves in our neighborhood, it felt as if a huge weight was lifted. I could breathe freely again. I could truly make this my home. We started a little free library last summer. I get such joy from supplying books to neighbors who might not otherwise have them. Books, a gift of learning and discovery. So much of who I am now has come from books. The knowledge I gained over the last few years started with books. I want to offer that to others whenever I can. More than ever, I see my neighbors as just that, my neighbors. But I don't pretend to know their stories, nor do I presume to know what they need. I must engage and get to know people. This spring, I intentionally started being really friendly on my neighborhood walks, not simply saying hi when it seemed appropriate, but stopping and having real conversations, starting conversations too, which isn't easy for this introvert. We visit with Jose across the street, share garden produce with Tanya next door. We pet sit for the couple behind us, and Harvey borrows our ladder. There is much I must do to continue building these relationships. It won't be easy. I'll make mistakes, but only through making those mistakes will I learn to be a better ally and friend. I see the world differently now, and I'm so much better for it. Once the bubble of ignorance is punctured, there's no going back. I'm glad we made this move. Without it, I might never have investigated my own whiteness. I'm afraid I would have stayed in the bubble the rest of my life, just another well-meaning white woman thinking she knew what was best for them. If my personal theology calls me to the interconnectedness of all life, then to be in relation with others is imperative. Only recently have I recognized that simply acknowledging our society's institutional racism is not enough. Inaction does not offer healing for my white self, nor help for my black friend. Awareness is but the first step. To be aware but not take action is to be complicit. To not take action means I must see all people of color as somehow less valuable, less important, somehow disposable and disregardable in comparison to me and mine. I must act somehow, or I am guilty of the continuing harm done in the name of whiteness. To know all this and decide not to act requires that I give away my very humanity. Thanks to the members of First Unitarian who have worked on issues of racial identity and racial justice for many years, I found many opportunities to put actions behind my words. Book groups focused on race and racial identity continue to challenge me to learn and understand my responsibilities as a white person in our society. Amos criminal justice team meetings offer the chance to be in a working relationship with people of color focused on systemic change. As a member of the Restorative Justice Group, I'm learning the value of restorative justice not only in criminal law, but as a roadmap for living. Our action teams focus on supporting legislation to end racial profiling, teaching restorative justice principles to our congregation, and bringing trauma-informed care to an elementary school here in Des Moines. Justice, we are told, is blind. But in our country, justice has never been blind. Black lives, from slavery through Jim Crow, the war on drugs, and mass incarceration, have always mattered less. Placing a Black Lives Matter banner on our church is a statement that we are no longer content to hide our heads in the sand and pretend we don't see the truth. It is a recognition that our belief in the inherent worth and dignity of all lives calls us to stand up and declare the injustice our Black and brown neighbors, friends, and fellow citizens endure. So, how had simply staying in the neighborhood made a difference? At first, I wondered how my living here improved the neighborhood. We increased the property value of our house. We watch for vandalism and report incidents to the police. But I could never quite come up with a satisfactory answer. Then it dawned on me. The change wrought by our staying here in Cheatham Park wasn't to the neighborhood or to my neighbors. It was to me. I am changed by living here. I am a different person now. The neighborhood changed me for the better.